Hello everyone, welcome to an all-new episode of Reality Bytes. Today we discuss an extremely interesting book with an extremely interesting author. The book's name is The Majoritarian Myth. It essentially describes how there is a myth that Hindus in India, owing to their numbers and owing to them being a majority, are the aggressors in any situation where there is an involvement of the quote-unquote minorities, which could be either the Muslims or the Christians. The author I have today here with me is Mr. Kaushik Gangopadhyay. He is a PhD and he's a professor at IIM Koikor. Did I say that right?
That's great.
All
Perfect.
right, great. So thank you so much, Kaushik ji. Welcome. And thank you for speaking to me. I was telling you before this interview that a great book, you know you're reading a great book if as an interviewer you don't know what all you want to discuss, because there are so many things that you've covered in this book and it's so well researched and it gives Hindus the vocabulary to describe what they instinctively know. And incidentally, that's my first question. It has been my pet subject to say that Hindus instinctively know what they're going through and what they have generationally gone through. But sadly, we don't have the vocabulary or the scientific models or the statistics to truly explain to the world what's been happening to us and what continues to happen to us. In this book, you have relied on scientific models, you have relied on sociological models which are well established to explain the plight of Hindus and to explain how they are being actually discriminated against and not discriminating against others. So could you tell me, how did you decide or when did you decide to write this book?
Namaste, Nupur Ji.
Namaste.
Thanks for having me here, and I also extend my warm wishes to your audience. See, the point is, this book is churning of ideas for more than a decade. As you know, I'm an economist, but I was always perplexed how social sciences, they depict an alternative reality. And now this Harvard, Claudine Gay, all this affair has come out. Everybody is knowing about it, but I knew it long time ago. So I was thinking, what's wrong with the models? And it occurred to me that they have theories which are merely hypotheses. They are kind of posited, but they are never proven. So I took a journey to create an alternative framework for the social sciences that actually could give you the reality rather than having an alternative reality. And this is an application of that. So my idea of this book, it started 1 decade back. I did not know it has to be majoritarianism, but I knew it has to be some topic on the social sciences. And when I kind of done the framework, I saw this is the best application to give it to the people before motivating them to my framework.
Okay. So the foundation of your book essentially is that just because in numbers, population, a community is in the majority, doesn't mean that they are the intolerant lot.
Yes.
And doesn't mean that it leads to majoritarianism as the left liberal vocabulary knows it. And to explain that, you've come up with you've used this extremely interesting theory called LTSE, which is the linear theory of social evolution, which says that if the majority community has strings of LTSE, they will be intolerant.
And if any community, majority or minority.
Majority or minority. And if they don't, they won't. So could you explain to us what LTSE really is? What is this linear theory?
Sure. But let me first say you something.
Okay.
This book I wanted, so there's the lack of dialogue between the left and the right. So suppose typically how this works. The right might say, well, left, you are not exactly equal. You are holding these atrocities are more at pedestal, and other side kind of put it under carpet, under the carpet. But then the left says, well, we have a framework. We have a framework called majoritarianism, and we know that you can't really be equal. That's our policy, right? And then basically the dialogue starts, right? There's nothing happened. So I mean, one can attribute malice to other party, but that's pretty much it. It happens, yeah. But in my book, I always held the left liberals in good intention, best of their intention. I wrote it categorically. So I wanted this book to be read by them so that they actually can have a dialogue, right? I'm not attributing any malice to them. I'm saying you are right on your principles, intention, but let's see whether it is scientific or not, right? So what I have done, I have said, okay, you are saying, so basically this idea, it's a cultural Marxist idea, stems back to Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci, Italian communist and Frankfurt School. But the idea is basically, all communities are sort of equal culture-wise. So the majority is always oppressing the minority, sort of like that, right? But you see, this is an insult to human beings. You are saying basically people have malice inside them, and that will get out unless your theories are omnipresent everywhere. That's wrong, I think. I think most people I meet, they are good people. They might have their follies or lapses, but they are overall good people. So you cannot really hold someone to be a bad or oppressing kind of person. That's what the majoritarianism does. It doesn't say so, but that's what it does. I have said, okay, why would someone think about oppressing others when there is no conflict of interest? So it's a moral idea. So the moral idea is, suppose someone has a doctrine which essentially says that my values has to be uniform, it has to be absolute, then he has to actually go against the values of the other community. And then if there is no conflict of interest or not, there will be conflict. That's what I call it LTS. This is a sociological term, linear theory of social evolution. So essentially, it has two characteristics. One is the theory or doctrine will grow linearly over time. So let's say Christianity, it's the original LTSC. Jesus is the first Christian. I call it political Christianity. So basically, Jesus is the first Christian. Then Christians are going up, going up, going up, and they are imagining they will go up linearly till the judgment day comes. Right? That's what the kind of the doctrine is about. So sometimes, suppose you are not, taking up Christianity, you are going against it. It's a sort of it's a sort of going against the mental models you are having, right? And that creates a problem. But that is an academic problem. So the second characteristic is very important. If you don't adhere to the doctrine, then basically you have to be otherized, right? Basically, you have to be held inferior. Your rights have to be denied, right? And political Christianity has done that. When the Europeans, they went to the America, they never have any kind of, they have never given any rights to the Aborigines who are not Christians, right? They take the land away and all these things. I think biggest massacre, biggest genocide of the basically human history, I would say. And this thing kind of happened. But then, of course, political Christianity is not doing very well in the West. But its offshoots are kind of growing very much, right? But I will say my viewers one thing. If you want to know what is LTS, you have to ask this question. If the average person of that belief, he or she is saying, I am the best because I am X. Now, if you ask a typical Christian or typical Muslim, they might say, well, I may not be the best just because I'm Muslim or Christian. I have to do good action, good karma, right? But if you ask the most decent liberal, no, are you the best because you are liberal? Say, yeah, of course. Because I am liberal, I am the best, and you are not good enough to be liberal. That's why you are not good.
So essentially, you're saying that LTSC says that there is an element of otherization, which is that if you don't adhere to my principles, if you don't adhere to my faith, then you are somebody who is quote unquote the enemy of everything that we believe in. You're not a nice person, and you need to be proselytized to my faith, proselytized to my way of life, proselytized to how I see the world, for you to be worthy of getting the same rights. Is that
almost? So they call it false reality. Reality cannot be true or false, right? It's reality. Your reality bites, right? But for these LTSs, there is some true reality. There is some false reality. If you don't belong to my way, you are the false reality. Before they used to see your devil's worshipper or all this kind of thing. Right. But that's pretty much it.
So you also talk about assumed asymmetry in different communities.
Yes.
Which leads to LTSC.
Or other
is
way,
one of the
LTSE
factors.
leads to the asymmetry.
Right. Could you explain that? What is the asymmetry between the communities that you're talking about?
So basically, if you follow LTSE, if you really believe in this model, then you have to actually allot resources for your moral principles, right? If you really think you are a communist, for example, you have to make the entire world a communist. Then you have to use a lot of your time, right, to go to party meetings and other things, and poking others' problems and going there. So Gramsci, I have quoted Antonio Gramsci, and he actually says, he has a passage there, and he says this intolerance. He used the once intransience, but it effectively means intolerance. He says intolerance is the noble thing. We have to be intolerant so that we can destroy this society. They are having it. So he's glorifying it, right? So basically, you use your energy to go for intolerance, right? That's what the LTSE does. That's what the LTSE does.
So it's intolerance towards any traditional set orders of society.
Exactly. It's traditional society orders are wrong because they don't adhere to their theory.
Okay. So anybody who doesn't adhere to their theory is supposed to be the recipient of their intolerance.
Of course.
And they are otherized, and therefore they need to be proselytized to their way of life.
Either, or they have to be cornered so that they becomes a very shallow part of the reality who eventually dies with time, right?
Right.
And we know how it happened with the Jews in Europe, right? I mean, actually Hitler said, well, where am I doing something very different? It has happened for ages, right? I mean, he was not completely wrong, let's say.
So in your book, you also kind of talk about these different examples of not just how LTSC manifested in these communities, leading to intolerance, but also of this term you use, virtuous victimhood. So you've spoken about the Nazis, how they believed, how Hitler believed that it was his duty to do what he was doing. And he otherized the Jews and, dehumanized them to a point where it led to their genocide. You've spoken about how the Native Americans were denied their rights because they were otherized, because they believed that they need to be civilized. How Christian proselytization manifests itself, how Islamic proselytization manifests. You've given a list of examples. So, what is the commonality in all of this that you have noticed in your research, in all of these examples that you've given? What is common that manifests in intolerance, which over time then manifests in either denial of rights or a genocide?
Okay, that's a beautiful question. So the idea is psychologically, any human being is averse to aggression generally. So that's why these theories, they have to create a virtuous victimhood. We are not doing anything, but we are being proselytized, or we are being we are the receiving end. We are victim, right? I mean, in Islamists, they say Islam khatre mein hai, right? This is a typical very example. Right? Nazis used to say the Jews, they are kind of making us into the corner, right? Actually, if you read the Nazi literature, it will look like actually the Jews are persecuting the Nazis, not the other way around. Right. So they have to pretend this kind of there's a name in psychology, it's called microaggression. So they do some kind of a staged incident of aggression. So the Nazis, when they attacked Poland, before that, some Nazis, they are in police soldiers uniform, they attacked Nazi radio station or something. And then it was circulated in BBC also. BBC showed, well, police people, they have attacked the Nazis. If cut to the point, 2013, a very eminent US college in Pennsylvania. For the name, you have to go to the book. Now, there what happened? Ku Klux Klan, right? It's a very white supremacist organization. I mean, racist. Again, that's an LTSC again. So these organizations uniform, some people were terrorizing people, apparently moving around and everything. And the liberals are complaining. Now, this is very puzzling because usually Ku Klux Klan was basically American South affair mostly, not in this Pennsylvania definitely. And also it is 2013, Ku Klux Klan died not like 60 years, I mean more than 60, maybe 80 years ago. So it's a long time after, right? So how was it happening? And the inquiry happened. And it turned out actually these are the liberal students who donned a Ku Klux Klan uniform so that this rumor could be spread and they can put conservatives at the back foot and go their propaganda, right?
And that's how it happens. This is very interesting because you see so many parallels in India. We had covered this string of fake Jai Shri Ram crimes, if you remember, where they claimed that they were being beaten up by Hindus screaming Jai Shri Ram. And it turned out to be completely fake. Most of the cases, I think all of the cases at that time in that string of events, it all turned out to be fake. There was no beating up, screaming Jai Shri Ram. So what you're saying is they imagine these events with the help of which they can convince the people that they are being victimized. So there are some high priests of these LTSs who are smart people, but they need power. And the only way they can get power is the masses who believe in LTSE, they have to sell the victimhood to them. So the masses will respond, right, with aggression and attack. So this traces back to political Christianity. So there's a rumor or sort of, I would say, urban legend that Christians were persecuted in pagan Rome. Well, it is almost an urban legend because never the pagans told the Christians, be pagan. They never said that. They just said that we have the city deity and it's our tradition to pay respect to the city deity or the emperor, do it. And as a microaggression, they refuse to do it. Right? And so there are books on that, Catherine Nixie's The Darkening Age, and there's God Against the God, Jonathan Trott. So all these things are there. People can look it up. But then this is summarized by Yuval Noah Harari very well. He says the number of Christians who were supposed to be killed in pagan Rome, that is less than number of Christians killed in one night in the fight between two Christian denominations. Right. So, but the Roman pagans are no more. So what you're saying is that they have such, for the lack of a better word, supremacist and absolutist ideas about either their faith or their set of values and their set of rules in the society, that any deviation from what they believe or even a request that, this is what we believe in, so maybe just let's live in mutual respect and we will not convert to yours, you don't need to convert to us. Even that is seen as an act of aggression, a microaggression, and therefore it's used to radicalize the people. So actually, firstly, I will say one thing. The kind of idea of what you are saying is correct, but they don't call it supremacist. They have used a different term. They call universalist. Right. This is actually the problem is it is possible that Christianity is a good thing for a group of people. Given, no problem. But it need not be the good thing for all of humanity, for all of the times, right? Yeah. So that universalization is a problem. And the more universalization it happens, it becomes that much aggressive, right? Because the traditional values has to be negated by hook or by crook, right? So that's what kind of it happens this way. So I give you one or two examples how it happened in Indian Constitution. Yeah. So Article 25, it says that there is a right to propagate. Now, of course, it is a political statement because initially this was not there, because in India, the idea of conversion is not there. The idea of conversion in Indic culture is a moral upliftment. You have to make yourself a better person. That's what we call it, conversion, right? Now, that cannot happen just because you change your name from a Hindu name to Christian name, right? That doesn't happen that way. You all know that. Yeah. And again, this is also an example I gave. Let's look at Gandhiji. All the Christian nation that time, they held Gandhiji an ideal Christian. That kind of Christian values, no Christian of that time, they had it, Gandhiji had, right? But Gandhiji was not a Christian, right? I mean, so then the idea of Christian values making you a better person, it is now empirical reality. It's a belief only, right? It's a theory, right? But if you see this Article 25, it has come and it says that you have to propagate your religion. And it was given actually insistent of the Anglo-Indians and Christians that this is our religious duty. In the Constitution Assemblies, it's there. Now, the moment you do it, how in the real life Hindus work? So, I have given the example of Greek Constitution, and Greek Constitution does not give the right to propagate. It says anyone can have any religion of his or her choice. That's absolutely fine. But there will not be no institutionalized propagation or institutionalized evangelization. That is not correct. And they have done it to stop, they save their Orthodox Church, right, from the
Protestant denominations. Then basically, the moment you do it, Hindus, what they have supposed to do? To protect their religion, they have to actually put the idea of conversion, right? Reconversion, we call it, and then all these things. And the moment you do it, we have to change. And in the academy, they will say Hindus are getting aggressive, Hindus are getting fascist, Hindus are become reactionary, right? But you are doing it by putting that thing in the law, right?
So what you're saying is institutionalized real victimhood, real victimization of Hindus leads to their response. And then because of that response, they are the ones who are termed as the aggressors.
Exactly.
After people forget about the initial aggression to begin
and
with.
That's their theory, that right propagation has to be there. That's a theory. Nobody knows it's a good thing for humanity. It's a theory. But because you put that theory in the empirical reality, Hindus have to change, right? And then you call it aggression. Right?
So this is almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. That's the
you
problem.
You work backwards to demonize the majority.
So that's what I say. So that I say LTSs, they are also self-fulfilling. So the moment this something goes and goes, then it has to be a kayamat. It has to be a judgment day. You cannot have a harmonious kind of relationship, right? Yeah. A stable equilibrium. If you look at Europe, so it is going for a Christendom, and eventually Europe become completely Christian, right? In early Shakespeare's early works, right? In Macbeth, some pagan witches were there, but eventually they are not there anymore, right? Everybody was Christian and everything.
In fact, there was was it Julius Caesar or was it Midnight Summer Dream? I can't really remember. I think it was. In which play is Shylock there?
That is the Merchant of Venice.
Merchant of Venice. Thank you. I was just forgetting. Merchant of Venice is very anti-Semitic.
Yes.
If you really think about it.
Yeah, of
so
course.
Shakespeare's writings have demonized the quote-unquote pagans and even the Jews.
Exactly. Yep. So the Martin Luther, the original Lutheran church, right? Yep. By his name. So he was actually very anti-Semitic person. He was a father of the Protestant Christians, a lot of denominations, right? Yeah. But he was extremely anti-Semitic person. I mean, many people don't know that. And this is why many people see Nazism not as an isolated phenomenon, but basically a climax of the anti-Semitic policies that was going on for ages, kind of thing.
Yeah, because the church itself was so anti-Semitic.
Yes, of course.
Always, historically.
And it was secularized. Initially, Jews are bad because they are not Christians.
Right.
Then what happens? You have Darwin, you have belief in matter over mind, and then it has to be secularized. So Jews are bad not because of faith, but because of their being a separate race, but the same idea. So the idea of racism, again, you can trace it from the political Christianity itself, right?
Okay.
It's a secularization of that.
So now that we've spoken about LTSC, the question, I can almost hear the arguments that we'll get to counter this.
Sure.
That everything you're saying can actually be applied to the Hindus as well, if you really work backwards.
If you believe in the religion as a category.
Right. We've addressed it that, it's sort of working backwards to make the majority the demons. But let's just try doing that anyway.
Sure.
So we've said that, you said that there is this virtuous victimhood that is instilled in a group of people for them to then act aggressively against the otherized lot. Now, I run Op India. And I have been saying for many, many years that I feel like we are documenting our end. Hindus are documenting their end with aggressions every single day. I know for a fact that everything that's documented, all the violence that's documented against Hindus, they're real violence, religiously motivated violence. You have dead bodies to prove it. You have testimonies to prove it. You have charge sheets, FIRs, convictions. But our theory, what we just discussed, can then be reversed and said that we are instilling the idea of virtuous victimhoods in the Hindus as well. When we say that Hindus are being victimized, when we say that Hindus are constitutionally being victimized, the judiciary is victimizing them. We've seen so many orders where they want to reform Hinduism but not other religions, and so on and so forth. The minorities are victimizing them, so-called minorities, the Islamic onslaught against them, the Christian proselytization of them. So what makes you believe that the opposite is not true?
Okay, so I can answer this in two ways. One is theoretical, one is empirical.
Both.
So I start with the theory that Hinduism is clubbed with Christianity as a religion. This is the handiwork of the Christian missionaries. Hindus in the 19th century, they did not know that there is a religion called Hinduism. They knew that we follow our dharma, right? And dharma is a very universal phenomenon. As a father, I have the dharma to my son. And that dharma is no different for a Christian father to his Christian son, right? I mean, it's a very similar. There's no difference between them, right? But if you look at the faith, Christian faith, it is different, right? There's a faith of Christianity and it doesn't apply to mass, right? Actually, I used to go to churches in some years. But they say, okay, don't participate in the communion because it's a part of faith, but otherwise, just observe and do this. Yeah. It's nice, it's kind of courteous for them. Yeah, so basically, if you see that, how then Hinduism happened? I mean, how did things? So basically, the Christian missionaries, they came to India and they saw that India is a pagan religion and everything. They have to sell their religion. That's their moral duty. So now they see the problem is, if they say that you have no religion, then people will say, well, we have no religion, we are happy. Why do we need religion? So they have to say that you have a religion, but that is inferior to our kind, so just accept it. And that's how Hinduism was formed by the Christian seminaries in a way, right? So the categorization the Marxists do, this Hinduism in the same league as the other religions, that is completely untrue in a way. If you look at the linear theory was, Hinduism has no linear theory. Everything is cyclical, right? Satya, Treta, Dwapar, Kali, 4 yugas, and they go cyclically, right? Again, after Kali comes Satya, our Treta, Dwapar, Kali. Sometimes Dharma dominates, sometimes Adharma. So it's like a cycle. In the Hindu rituals also, we go both, right? Lakshmi, Alakshmi, both are kind of worshipped and all these kind of things. And actually, this is not an isolated case of Hinduism. The entire world was like that. So it is Yuval Noah Harari again. I go back to him because he is the man liberals believe. That's why I am quoting him over and over again. He writes in Sapiens, basically, if you go back to the Chinese historians, Greek historians, all before Christianity came, they all believed in a very cyclical kind of phenomenon. They didn't have any linear kind of theory. It's a Christianity that kind of invented this kind of a linear theory in a way. So Hinduism, because it's a pagan in a way, so it is predates the Christianity, right, or whatever Hinduism they call it. And this is not my opinion. This is the accepted academic understanding. S.N. Balgangadhar, a very distinguished thinker from Ghent University. He was also once the chair of the American Academy of President of the American Academy of Religions. He also believed in this. This is a seminal theory. Christian scholars like Tom Holland, he also says the same thing. And now, last but not least, it all comes down to sort of like you look at the empirical outcome, right? If you look at empirically, if you use the LTSE, when the LTSE gets the power, they suddenly oppresses the other side like nobody else, right? If you look at the Nazi ceremonies, Nazis came to power 1933, right? 1938, basically. So after 1933, all the Jewish intellectuals, they're out of the country, right? Now in India also, there's a lot of talk. Many intellectuals, they said they will leave India. But I don't know anyone who actually left India after 2014, right? Then next other thing is, if you look at the other ideas like riots, actually I have actually given statistics in my book. So the riots in the 6 years before Narendra Modi era, 6 years after Narendra Modi era. Right. So basically riots actually have fallen in number and all this kind of things. Then you look at basically the scholarships for minorities. So after Hindutva, they claimed power, they actually went up rather than going down. They actually more and more scholarships, right, are given. Even the IS appointments, more and more Muslims and other people are getting chance. So I don't see any way an LTSE would have behaved just the opposite way, but it's actually going other way around. So I don't see any empirical proof as well of any LTC in Hinduism or Hindutva for that matter.
So that becomes at a government and policy level, where you're basically incentivizing the intolerant minority to calm down and not create violence. It doesn't really work as far as violence and intolerance is concerned in the long run, but that becomes a government policy level decision. But at its very core, at its very foundation, what do you think that Hindus as a society, Hindus as a people have that keeps them away from the strands of LTSC after they acquire power?
So I would say the cultures are very continuous phenomenon. You cannot suddenly change the culture. So in Hinduism, we have this culture of accepting. So this is Sarva Dharma Samobhava. So this translation is completely wrong. This all religions are equal. That is, I think this is a very academically, it's a nonsense, I would say. But what is the important idea is Sarva Dharma. When we say, we don't equate dharma to religion. We say everybody has a sustainable way of living, and that sustainable way of living has to be respected. You cannot say my way of living is better than yours if it is sustainable. So that's why. So I think in India at least, Hindus have actually a problem from Western colonization. We see secularism as a solution to social intolerance. But what is secularism? It's basically you remove the religion from the public sphere, right? That's what it is in the Europe. In India, that essentially means that you basically remove your past, you cut up the past, right? You forget your culture and create a society. That cannot happen. That is an absurd idea. It is not me saying, it is Mahatma Gandhi ji saying, right? He has a basically lecture in the Chatham House. He basically said the British, they basically took the root away and cut the root, and that's how they destroyed us. Unfortunately, the same education is going on in the name of secularism. And
unfortunately, he kind of did the same, but we'll get to that later.
So Gandhiji's politics, if you say, I have a nuanced view of it, but I respect him as a teacher. As a teacher, I think he told Hindus one thing: don't look up to the West. Look at your values, your civilizational values, and do it. As a politician, people have their follies and other things, and that's a separate episode. I think I have to write a book on that before coming here. Another book, yeah. So, but the idea is basically this secularism. It's a wrong idea, because in the other sense, that religion actually does a lot of good things. Religious people, they are more happy in general. They are more forgiving. They are more, they donate more to the society. I have many communist friends who believe in equality. They don't spend a penny for any social cause, right? They just believe in equality in a very abstract way. But I think many religious people who don't have the notion of equality per se, but they are doing a lot of things, right? A lot of langars and other things are going on, lot of these donations, all these things are going on with the religious people only, right? So this secularism is a very different problem for us. So I would suggest, if I may, that we have to separate doctrines by linear theories. If you have a linear theory, that has to be negated. Any doctrine that has a linear theory, you cut short of your linear theory, and then that would be allowed in a civil society, in a harmonious society be there. And then if you can make a real sustainable society.
So you're an academic.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things that you can't say. But I have no such compulsions. So I'm going to reduce what you've said, and you don't have to comment on it if you don't want to. Essentially, if you say that we have to negate linear theories and those that propagate universal application of their theories, because that leads to LTSC and that leads to intolerance and then genocide, etc. We are essentially saying that the idea of dharma is something that is inherently incapable of imbibing strings of LTSC because it believes in each to their own. We fulfill our responsibilities to our job, to our family, to the society, and so on and so forth. The linear theories are Christianity and Islam, which believe in growth and proselytization and believe in us versus them, the essential otherization,
also
which comes
Marxism,
from
Marxism, culture and Marxism, all these issues. Yeah.
So what you're saying is that intolerance is inherent to linear theories. And intolerance, if you go by that theory, then you are saying that intolerance is inherent to Islam, Christianity, Marxism, and communism. Did I understand you correctly?
So basically, I would say that all Muslims calling them going by theoretical Islam would be injustice to them. There are Muslims like APJ Abdul Kalam, right?
Of course.
And there are Muslims like Qazi Nazrul Islam. Yep. So they actually thought religion is much more a fluid kind of thing.
Right.
They saw their experience outgrowing the theoretical dimension. And I don't see any problem.
They were actually otherized.
They were actually otherized. I agree with them. They were otherized a lot of the times. So but I have no problem in assimilating them in a harmonious society.
Correct.
And I would say that actually Hindus in the Ram Mandir, for example, we have done the right thing by calling Iqbal Ansari, right, who was the petitioner for the Babri Masjid to come. Because you cannot expect any Jew be invited in a Nazi function. That's impossible. But Hindus, in their one of the most sacred functions, they actually called an person from the supposedly opposite camp, right? He was contesting this thing. But it actually shows that you leave your inner theory out, we can accommodating, and we can build a harmonious society together.
I disagree with that. But again,
Yeah.
that is another discussion for another time. Now, I want to talk about liberalism because you say very interestingly that the more liberal a person is, the more intolerant they are. And the more liberal a society is, the more intolerant that society is. So, can you explain that to me?
Sure.
Because generally, for people, liberalism means tolerance, means pluralism, means taking everybody along, let everybody do what they want. But you've actually articulated the complete opposite, which I completely agree with you. But if you could explain to our listeners.
So I can
what you
again
really
explain
mean.
two ways. One is very experiential way,
Yeah.
and another is data, another issue. So let's go by the experience.
Mm.
So liberalism, if you leave the slogans, then there are some theories, and these theories guide their worldview, right? So one such theory is this majoritarianism, right? The majority oppressing a minority, right? All the time. Now let's see. I live in Kerala. I'm a Bengali, right?
Yeah.
My son, he has a passion for piano. He goes to the school, participates in a competition. His mother recorded all these things. He did not get the prize, and it seemed to us from the recordings and everyone that he did a better job than some of the award recipients. Right? Now I don't believe in liberalism, so I told my son that you see, it's an art, it's a worship of Saraswati. You do your best,
Right.
And if you don't get award, so what? You have to get joy out of just doing it, performing it. That's your worship. That's your commitment. That's your sacrifice. Now, suppose I believe in, let's do a counterfactual. I believe in liberalism. How would it have petered out, right? The moment I believe in majoritarianism, I could conveniently call myself a minority, linguistic minority. I am the Bengali and this is Malayali, right? I might say, well, these are the judges, they are Malayalis. I mean, the moment I say this narrative, eventually it comes the Malayali judges, they are being discriminatory to my son, right? Now, let's say it's a perception. If it is it's not real, let's say it's a perception. Even it's perception, we discuss it. My son, now he perceives that doing good performance, he doesn't get award. So he leaves any effort away, and then it becomes self-fulfilling. He would not get the award at all, and he would think that Malayalis are being discriminatory to him because of his own lapses, right? So it does not make him a better person anyway. Number one. Number two is he might actually think about retribution against someone else, right? Then again, that will make him a bad person, and that will not make any harmonious society in any manner. Let's say this is not perceived. This is real. He really did well, still he did not get award. Even then, it does not mean the judges actually were discriminatory because he was a non-Malayali. It is possible the judges favored some younger person because he was younger, he have to be kind of promoted or encouraged, right? He may have been, they might have another sex, another gender, females, they might have been, kinder to that person. That's possible. We are all human beings. We are all have our biases and everything, right? So again, we are perceiving, and then that's the wrong, right? Which is going to last point. Let's say it is real. They are Malayalis. Let's say it's not. I'm not saying it is at all the case. They are really. Let's say that is the case. They are Malayalis and they are discriminatory to him. Even then, that theory is wrong because his piano teacher is a Malayali who actually supports him, encourages him, and all the time, right? So liberalism, in any sense, the moment you believe in it, it cannot reduce the conflict. It will always aggravate conflict. It will always. This is what is happening in America, real time. One should read this Gadsart's The Parasitic Mind and how it is petering out everywhere, right? Everybody is imagining a victim and pointing the finger at that. The social harmony is gone. It is a kind of a very pathetic situation, I would say. Now let's look at the data. If you look at the data, and this is what I always hear from my liberal friends, all the intolerance in India is happening because of Hindutva, Hindu nationalism. Where is Hindu nationalism in America? Where is Hindu nationalism in Netherlands? Where is Hindu nationalism in Great Britain? All these countries' polarization is happening. So your theory is actually no theory at all. It does not explain anywhere anything, right?
So liberalism, you say that it increases intolerance in the society. If we look at the usual group of people who call themselves liberal in India, they also create imaginary fault lines. Fault lines which may not be imaginary, but they are expounded and, sort of increased by these imagined, again, virtuous victimhood. So, you can talk about regional divide, you can talk about caste divide. In fact, caste is also something that you address in your book. So, how do you think, liberals use that trope to increase the intolerance in the society towards Hindus?
So what happens, many of the times, this caste, they actually, I mean, as per the theory as well, they have a community, right? Castes were like jatis in our system, communities. They specialize in some jobs, right? Like we know Agarwals, right? They are more
Right.
merchant class, right? So now, if you really have a lot of expertise of this caste, you are tend to be in greater number in those kind of occupations, right? This is what the American social thinker, very extremely erudite one, Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell says basically it is impossible to find any profession where all the different imagined communities are equally represented. It's almost impossible.
Right.
Now, what happens? The liberals, they try to see all the professions, all the jatis are equally represented. That's a statistical impossibility almost, I would say. And the moment they imagine that, they always have some victimhood, right? They will have some aggression and all this kind of thing. So in real life, I see people are much more accommodating. The people in the street, they want to live as together, they want to live in harmony. But the moment you go to the educational institutes, your mind is washed, brain is washed, pure by these liberal theories. You tend to see everything in the glass, right, of these theories. And then you can imagine fault lines, right? And that's how all these things are happening, right? We can see so many, as you gave examples, so many places there's a linguistic lines, there's a problems are happening and all this kind of thing. And there are some politicians who love this kind of things, right?
So, when we talk about caste, from what I hear you saying, there is a parallel to be drawn with what's the imaginary fault line in India and what the imaginary fault line in the West. So in the West, they're talking about the African Americans, the blacks, and how they are not being represented. The LGBTQIA plus ABCDEFGH, they are not being represented, and they keep creating these imagined victim communities, claiming that they're not being equally represented in all fields.
Exactly.
There was this amazing shot of Jerry Seinfeld, who's a comedian.
I know.
Have you seen
Big
that?
fan of me. I'm a big fan of his.
Have you seen that interview of his where this interviewer asks him that, your audience is generally white, and he's like, oh, spare me this bullshit. You want to see representation even in the audience when it comes to comedy. So they keep creating these imagined victim groups. And in India, because of certain historicity, which has been, some of it is true, some of it is, concocted as atrocity literature, they also create those imagined victim classes and victim groups in India. They'll say that, oh, you're Bengali. I am a Marwadi from Calcutta. So you know that imagined fault line that exists in West Bengal.
I know a person who is doing it very actively in Bengal.
Right. So, they go to the Bengali community and say that, oh, in West Bengal, all the businesses are monopolized by the Marwadis, and therefore you are a victim because you are not being represented in the business community. They won't understand the difference that in Bengali households, academics is far more a focus. And the, Baniya community from which I hail, they are more inclined towards business. That's an imagined fault line in our state, in West Bengal. So there is sort of a parallel in the West and India. So do you think these liberals are simply drawing these lessons from the West and trying to force fit them into India to create?
Actually, what they are doing, I mean, they are actually what they are doing. They are actually taking them blaming. They are blaming us. So there is a book by Isabel Wilkerson. She actually wrote a book called Caste, and she said that American racism, it's not racism, it's caste.
So they are blaming us for what's happening. They are blaming us
for their thing. So Sheldon Pollock, right? He said that the Holocaust Nazis did, it is because of the Sanskrit literature. So this is the academics, the state of the affairs in the academia today.
So again, why do you think, and we'll come to the media bit, because you did a very interesting survey, which I would like to speak about, where you surveyed the articles in the global media. in the span of 2 years, I think.
3 years.
3 years.
1st January 2020
Yeah.
to 31st December 2022.
I'm just looking for the numbers that I had jotted down because I think the numbers make it very clear. The,
I think I can more or less describe it. Just correct me if the numbers are wrong.
Okay.
So there are about 9,000.
This is me testing you about your own book because I have the numbers.
I'm over 40, so losing my memory, but still let me see. So I got around 8,800 articles.
806.
All right. Corrected, ma'am. So now out of that, in 1/5 of the cases, you can identify when they say, so these are the articles that contain the words like majoritarian or majoritarianism.
Okay.
In the global media database in the 3 years span. And I tried to, so I have a TA and we work very closely. So you can, from the context of the article, can you identify which particular majority they are talking about while describing these terms?
Yeah.
And about 1/5 of the cases, we can actually identify which is the actual majority they are talking about.
So I'll just give the statistics a little more clearly. So you surveyed 8,806 articles in a span of 3 years, which contained the word majoritarian or majoritarianism. And you found that over 80% of those articles, almost 80% of those articles, held Hindus guilty of majoritarianism.
Yes.
While they form...
More than 80 actually.
More than 80.
80% straight away, but otherwise also, there is a percent or so that blames the Hindi speakers, and often the West they confuse between the words Hindu and Hindi. So that's also there.
And while Hindus form what, about 15% of the global population, is it?
Maybe less even.
Maybe less. If you take the communists and liberals out, it will probably be 8%,
that's what I was
5%.
trying to.
So this is very interesting. And I would like to understand, because this is the stream, the field that I work in as well. What is the kind of model that you applied when you were doing this survey? From a technical, scientific perspective, what was the model that you applied when you were doing this survey?
So basically the idea of proportionality, right? So every blame or something has to be proportional. So that's kind of the idea. So when even these liberals, they say the idea of structural violence, right? So whatever they cannot show by any data or something, they attribute to structural, a fancy term called structural violence. A lot of violence is happening, nobody is seeing. But that has to be proportional. You cannot really blame a 15% community for 80% of the crimes, right? Then you are following all the scientific ideas of proportionality. And that's what I was trying to see it have. And then again, there are other issues. Many of the times when the other communities, another interesting point of the survey, who is the number 2? Number 2 as the Sinhalese Buddhists, they are again about 7%. So all the problems are in South Asia, more or less.
So you're saying that 80%, over 80%, it blamed Hindus. About 7 or 8% they blamed Buddhists. I'm very interested to know, since its current context as well with the Israel-Hamas war, what percent was Jews?
Jews are very less. So, but what happened? Now Jews are also seeing the majoritarian theory very well. I will give the example. 7th October 2023, right? Hamas attacked, about 1,500 died, barbarous atrocities, we all know about it. Now, 9th October or so, Israel started the counter attack. Now, many people have a nuanced understanding, proportionality of Israel attack and everything. I'm not even going to debate that. I see there are reasons for both the sides. But between 7th October and 9th October, people in American universities, prestigious American universities, Ivy League universities, Cornell or so, professors, they are saying that there is a structural violence against the Hamas. Now Hamas, because killing and doing barbarous atrocities, they have actually leveled the field.
So this is essentially, they are calling violence the language of the oppressed.
Exactly. You know their terms very well. But this is, I would say, this is a whitewashing of terrorism and other atrocities by language. So I will say this is a structural violence that they are doing by using this kind of deceptive language.
But again, it's very interesting to me that in 3 years, over 80% has been attributed to Hindus globally.
Yes.
did you compare if there was a sudden spike in such articles, or did you just stick to those period of 3 years?
No, I actually, the problem is this is very time consuming.
Right.
You have to go each and every article and do it.
Yeah.
So for lack of resources, with much support, institutional support, I only stick to this much.
To those 3 years.
But I would say there is not too much of a spike. So there is some spike after the CAA bill was kind of done, right? But not too much. There is also spikes coming on electional cycles and other things. But this is an article, that kind of analysis requires a lot of more understanding and more data. Now I have thrown it away for the future researchers to work on.
In the period of 3 years that you actually focused on, you saw election cycle and CAA as the 2 or 3 spikes in such articles. Were there any other spikes specific to incidents?
No, election cycle, these CAA I can see the spike. Election cycles there might be. I'm not 100% sure. I have not done the analysis for lack of data. Other spikes I have not done it actually.
This is very interesting because we keep, there's so many people who keep talking about how over so many years and decades, there was a systemic dehumanization of the Jews that eventually led to the Holocaust.
Yes.
Not just by the Nazis, not just by Hitler, but globally, even by the Christians. When they talk about the crusade and so on and so forth, there has been a systemic otherization and systemic dehumanization of the Jews.
Even 40 years before Hitler, 1896, the person who created Israel essentially, Theodor Herzl, he was a very secular Jew. He saw one army official in the French army, not German, French army is being taken away. The guy is, while being taken away for execution, the guy is saying, I'm innocent. And the mob there, they are saying, kill the Jew.
Right. Do you see the cycle, do you see similarities in the cycle?
Yes.
Of the dehumanization of Jews, and then it leads to the genocide of Jews. And then decades later, when one of the greatest atrocities against the Jews has taken place after the Holocaust, mass atrocities, what the Hamas did on the 7th of October, it is again being justified as the language of the oppressed.
Yes.
Do you see a similar pattern with the Hindus where they are being dehumanized and any aggression against them?
So what I have found, this liberalism is an LTSE, but it is working in the media community, academia community, in the stand-up comedy and community very well, right? So these, because it's an LTSE, now LTSEs, they look for soft ground. They usually tend to hesitate against another LTSE because they know that there will be strike back, pushback, right? So they know that Hindus do not have any LTSE, Buddhists, they do not have an LTSE. Even I have said that whites in America largely don't have an LTSE, and that's how they are going against them. Whites in America are the 3rd position in that list.
Okay. So first is Hindus, then is Buddhists, then are the whites.
Whites of America.
Whites of America, and then 4th?
Are less, much less after that. Just cute, But so you can see the pattern, right? I mean, against whom they are going. I mean, I lived in America. I lived among the whites. I was there. I did not feel any racism in America.
Interestingly, I visited Israel recently in Jan, and I was extremely welcomed. Even at the Temple Mount, whatever is accessible to the Jews, the Wailing Wall, I was very welcomed. They wanted me to come there. They wanted me to pray. They, to whatever God. They just were happy that somebody is there understanding their plight.
Their tradition, yes.
And their tradition. They were open-armed, welcomed. So I don't think the Jews have the LTSC, the whites have the LTSC. I think what you're trying, again, I keep coming back to it, most majority communities then in the world might not have LTSC except 2 or 3.
So this is actually the thinking of a conservative thinker, Yoram Hazony, very famous Jewish conservative thinker. He has a book, The Virtue of Nationalism, award-winning book. And he says when the liberals, they blame the nationalism, you see, they always go back to the Nazism. Nazis were so bad, they are nationalists. What they don't mention, Nazis were not only nationalists, they are also socialists.
Right.
They are also racists. The typical nationalists, they don't have socialism, they don't have racism, as a theory, right? So if you look at the Russian nationalism, right, if you look at the Japanese nationalism, so we are not socialists in any sense of the term that we have to be equality across the globe or anything like that. In fact, this Nazism, they saw themselves as a continuation of Holy Roman Empire. That's what the term Reich is there, right? They are the Third Reich. First Reich was the Holy Roman Empire. So essentially, it's an imperialism. And this is what the Yoram Hazoni, he actually said that these are the two imperialisms. So in right-wing circles in India, we call them Abrahamic. I don't quite see the term are often befitting because the Jews are Abrahamic, but they don't universalize their theory that much. These other two political versions of these religions, they actually universalize their doctrine.
This is very interesting. So can we talk a little about Nazism versus Hindu nationalism? Because I have lost count of the number of times I've been called a Nazi, and I have absolutely no idea what makes me a Nazi. So if you could talk a little about
the similarities,
Nazism versus Hindu nationalism, the differences, what sets apart Hindu nationalism from Nazism and from the nationalism as was espoused by Hitler and Nazi Germany.
Sure. Yeah. So the Hitler, he has a very racist view of the world, right? The Aryans are the best race. Then there are second community which are different other races, and Jews are subhuman. If you look at the Hindu nationalists, they don't have any understanding of the race at all. In fact, Hindu nationalism is probably, and along with maybe Russian and other persons, this nationalism, they think that it's a kind of region-specific concept, right? We have their sacred geography, and Diana Ike has a book, right? And then this geography makes us special because we live on that, we build our traditions on that. Nazis, they're actually anti-tradition. They say the traditions were kind of wrong because they awarded the Jews too much respect and all these kind of things, right? But we Hindus, we actually go back to our tradition, right? So this is actually opposite way. We are, and then let's look at the purpose. The Nazis, they wanted to have the entire Europe under their command and new global order, something like that, right? But Hindus, we don't want to go to Makkah, right? We are not even saying that Muslims in India should become Hindus. That's not the purpose of it at all. Yeah. The idea is everybody has to be tolerant. Aurobindo Nilakandanji, he said, what? Theodiversity. Everybody should acknowledge that there are different means of living your life, and that you have to respect them. That's all we are only asking for others. So, and Nazis were actually saying that everyone is false but them. So, I think there is no comparison at all. Nazism is an LTS in my book as well, a very dominant one. And Hindus, I don't see any LTS at all.
Do you think Nazism is closer to Islam and Christianity actually?
They are in the same category as political Islam, political Christianity in my book.
And then when...
Actually, Hitler, there is a passage from Mein Kampf, Hitler, in my book. And I'm rephrasing, I don't remember, but exact words. But he is actually saying that I look at the Christianity. They don't only wanted to install their own God, but they wanted to destroy the altars of the pagan religions, right? And that's why we Nazis, we don't want to just say our statements, we want to destroy your ideas, other ideas.
So he compared his ideology to the Christian modus operandi, you're saying?
Exactly. And there is another book, The American Holocaust, by a very famous academician from Stannard. So he actually writes. So basically, if you look at these patterns of genocide in the Americas by the political Christians of medieval times, they are actually far greater in some sense, or maybe comparable at least, to the Nazi Holocaust. So it might look like Hitler took inspiration from them.
So, as we've established, there's a vast pool of difference between Nazism and Hindu nationalism.
There's no compare, I can
There's
see.
There's nothing
no comparison.
And it's not comparable at all. I think the forced comparison comes when Hindus defend themselves. As we said, they forget about the original aggression and they only focus on the self-defense and make that the aggression and the aggressors the victim. It was interesting to read in your book when you spoke about how the Kashmiri Hindu genocide had about 1802 reports. It was again in that span of 3 years or
No,
total?
it was the overall. From whenever
Overall.
it happened. But it has stagnated because it's the old
Of
phenomenon.
course. So 1,20,000 Hindus left Kashmir because
That's the academic statistics.
right.
Official statistics. Yeah.
Right. The real numbers are
Can be anywhere.
far more. And they left, and there were only 1,802 reports versus Godhra, which saw 29,092 reports. And you use that example to talk about Inayatullah's causal layered analysis, where you talk about litany and how the same trope is repeated over and over again. So could you tell us about how Inayatullah's concept of CLA and the litany really works with the Indian context?
Sure. So what Suhail Inayatullah, he has his framework. He's a futurologist. He is born Pakistani, but must have overcome their culture. He has the idea of the myth. He says some incident is happening. We don't look at the incidents, like the media also they say that we don't publish the statistics, we have a narrative. That's what the media person say.
Yeah.
This is exactly what Inayatullah is saying. You have a myth inside you, and that myth making you see things, right? So when Kashmiri Pandit genocide happened, largest displacement in the post-partition times, we did not see really a lot of people going. So I actually studied all the books that talks about the perils of majoritarianism in the Indian context, and one of the books writes, I mean, I'm paraphrasing of course, that Kashmiri Pandits are not really minority because they are sort of like majority-like, whatever it means.
Majority-like.
So they have some technical terms. They are said, I think, they are saying, I'm not getting their terms, there are too many terms, but basically they are saying that even though it's a minority,
but
it should be stated de facto majority.
Because they're Hindus, essentially.
They
so
are
they become
basically
the
Hindus.
majority.
So essentially what happens when you don't have really scientificity, you actually tend to develop a kind of a cult or religion kind of thing. So in the religion of liberalism, so you can't really have a heresy, right, where the majority could be victims. That's a heresy for them. And that's why they can't really reconcile it. So they deny them, sometimes the minority status. So I actually try to see if they saw the Kashmiri Pandits as a minority. And I just got one article in this entire span, 3 years. Yeah.
Wow. And all of these articles were essentially, did you do a qualitative analysis of the?
I would have loved to. I was racing for the book because,
right.
Yeah. So, but I actually saw the titles. And so basically, whenever this is majority against minority, it is more of like a Nazism and all these kind of tropes are coming on. And the other times, it's more of a law and order issue. Is something, so that kind of sort of things are there. So, of course, I think I invite future researchers to their textual analysis and all these kind of things.
So, you're saying that essentially most of the articles written about the Kashmiri Hindu genocide and exodus did not particularly see them as the victim community at all. It essentially saw them, the victim community of religious hate at all. It essentially saw them either as, somehow facilitating their own problems or law and order issues of the state, which is not particularly
or even conveniently, these are like economic problems.
Economic problems.
Yeah. So I now remember the term. They are called dubious minority. So they are not real minority. They are dubious minority.
Wow, this I have never heard. So what is the concept of dubious minority?
Well, it's a minority in numbers, but because they have a lot of positions and everything, you cannot call them minority.
It is so. Isn't it the same sort of narrative which is used against the Jews as well? That there are
Jews may not be so. So to be fair, Jews had a lot of leverage in the liberal circle, and so, of course, I think the Jews are also sort of taken aback by the kind of extreme response that I got after 7th October. I think in a way, many of the thinkers who started all these things were Jews. So they did not know it is a Frankenstein that is coming against them as well, in some sense of the term. But so what happens? So many of the teams are against Jews, but don't use the concept of majority or minority. They use it some different language.
Got it. So for them, Kashmiri Hindus in Kashmir, I'm sorry, what term did you use?
Dubious minority.
Dubious minority. So
Mm.
they're saying that, okay, maybe in numbers they're lesser, but
Mhm.
they are actually the majority because they belong to the Hindu community in India.
Exactly.
And therefore, according to the theory of majoritarianism, they can't really be the victim, and therefore,
so you have to be denied, sort of like that.
their genocide has to be denied.
So it is not a very. So basically, what liberalism does, if you go by real data wise, any persecution is same. But what liberalism does, it makes an order, right? And in the order of their atrocities, it is not that much atrocious. It has to be come down and put down, right?
Again, there are some parts of your theorization that I essentially disagree with, not in theory but in practical application today.
Sure.
For example, Hinduism not being viewed as a religion. I see certain repercussions of that as well. For example, in the judiciary, they feel comfortable to set the limit of the dahi handi or intervene in the culture and the tradition of Sabrimala because Hinduism is not seen as a religion.
No, I see this is a problem with the definition of secularism. Because our constitution, whether you put it in preamble or not, it's essentially a secular constitution, right? That says the public sphere has to be secular and under the mandate of the court. I think that is a very much centralization, and this is sort of atrocity against the traditions, because you feel the traditions have no meaning. You have some notion of secular theories and you can put it on them.
So this is very interesting. From everything you've said, it almost seems like our main enemy today is liberalism far more than anything else. Liberalism and secularism far more than anything else, because they are attacking the root of our very civilization, which is tradition.
And there's a reason for that. You see, if you look at the history of our Homo sapiens, right, we are here for, let's say, 10,000 generations. We have cultivated all, even if you look at the hominids, it may be 1 lakh generations or even more than that. So there is a continuity, and we take lessons, we experience, and that's how the conservative values are kind of formed, right? Just because you have an untested theory of 2-3 generations old, you cannot all throw it away. That is that's what in our culture we call it aham, ego. We consider ourselves so important that our forefathers, ancestors, they are all stupid and we are doing the right thing. I think this is exactly the problem with the secular liberalism. They have the theory so sacrosanct, they forget whether this is applicable, so much universal or not, and they go against the empirical understandings. So my major agenda is there's a lot of truth in the empirical values, and our social sciences should be constructed on that. That's what I call it, empirical social sciences. Yeah.
So you've spoken about the judiciary, you've spoken about the constitution in your book, you've spoken about the academia, you've spoken about media, you've spoken essentially about every institution in India that is furthering LTSC and victimizing the majority on the basis of majoritarianism. It's so all pervasive almost. What do you see as a solution? I know you deal with it in your book, but I want you to tell me, what do you see as a solution?
So, I mean, as a policy, we have to go back to the age-old wisdom, Satya and Ahimsa. In Mahabharata, it is there. There's a lot of debates in Mahabharata on Satya and Ahimsa, what are their limits and all these things. It is also taken up by Gautam Buddha. He also said, use the words pragya and karuna, but essentially the similar words. So why one reason I said Gandhiji, because he also take up the same trope of the Indian civilization, Indic civilization, and he used the same words. I think our founding principles should be based on Satya and Ahimsa, right? See what is the reality or not. If you see the reality, majoritarianism will vanish. You don't stay anywhere, right? If you look at reality, if you look at the Ahimsa, then essentially the secular ideas often goes against, these are hingshas, against tradition. They actually erode tradition without any instigation. So I think in a way, we have to go for a sustainable civilization, sustainable state. Jagannathanji, Jaggi sir, he called it the dharmic state. Then basically we have to say that we have no problem with any dharma or any ideology as long as it is not a linear theory. Just remove your linear theory and assimilate as a very sustainable solution to the world.
My last question, and it could be a last discussion. when we talk about ahimsa,
Mhm.
there is also a part in your book where you say that sometimes, I don't remember who you were quoting. Were you quoting Alexei the Tocqueville? I don't really remember who you were quoting. But you said that there's a theory that says that tolerance, extreme tolerance.
Karl Popper.
Karl Popper, thank
Huh.
you. You said that extreme tolerance then manifests itself in intolerance and
Yes.
LTSC.
Mhm.
So then when we talk about ahimsa
Mhm.
as a concept,
Mhm.
and especially that which was manifested by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi,
Mhm.
I would imagine that it, sort of proves what Karl Popper was saying completely. So then how do we see ahimsa as one of the solutions?
So this is actually the problem. So we have very big towering figures. They come with the good ideas, but there are some of the ideas, because we are a colonial nation, right, for so many hundreds of years. So we actually, some of the times we misinterpret, and we wanted to take that their approval. So what Gandhiji did, he a lot of the times he went back to the Russian Christianity and sort of said that ahimsa is non-violence, right? But that's not the idea of ahimsa in India. We don't call the Rama and Krishna, even though they are involved in wars, as hingsha. They are not causing hingsha, right? They are again worshippers of ahimsa only. So the idea of ahimsa is look at the source. Is this ahimsa? Is it? Are you the source? Then I have to negate it, and it requires a lot of introspection and everything. But suppose I see I am not the source. As I told you in case of LTACs in the book, the source of the intolerance is the LTAC, right? Then definitely I am not causing it. Then to remove it, actually, if I have to go, so this is against, I am saying against LTACs, but it is not hingsha, because I am saying that you are the causing problem. For sustainability, you have to remove the linear theories.
So you and I actually agree, because I have kept saying this, that, we keep saying ahimsa parmo dharma,
Huh?
but we forget that dharma hinsa tatevacha. So we
that
actually
that
sort of
quotation
agree.
is sort of doesn't enjoy the approval of the source, I mean original source. In our terms, dharma is equivalent to satya and ahimsa. If you want a sustainable world which is dharma, you have to have the reality. You should not be the source of the hingsha at all.
So what you're saying is again that you don't perpetrate the violence, but if you have to defend yourself against violence which is being perpetrated against you, then that resultant violence is not seen as himsa.
That's what the Gita is, right? So Krishna is telling Arjuna that you have to fight because you have a duty as a Kshatriya, that you have to give a just world. And if you be a muse spectator, you run away from the battlefield, you are actually negating on your duty.
Right. So you and I agree on Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi.
Nice to know that we are agreeing.
We have finally agreed on at least one aspect of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Great. So yes, so thank you so much for this amazingly enlightening conversation. I think Hindus need the scientific models and the vocabulary, and they need to draw on thinkers and social sciences to give voice and definition to what we know instinctively has been happening with us. And I think this book goes a long way to arming and equipping Hindus to truly and genuinely articulate their problems, something that the Jews have managed to do, but the Hindus have utterly failed in that attempt, explaining to the world what we've been going through. So thank you so much. I would recommend to all my listeners and readers, please buy this book. It's by Garuda, the publisher is Garuda Prakashan. It's called The Majoritarian Myth, How Unscientific Social Theories Create Disharmony. It's by Mr. Kaushik Gangopadhyay, and we've just heard from him. It is a book that will make you think. It is a book that will make you question. It is a book that will make you agree and disagree, but it will certainly enhance your understanding of what our community is going through. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Namaste.